And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
I don't care!
What's next?
What's next?
What's next?
Don't you want to hear what's next?
What are you going to do next?
What's next for you?
What's next?
What's next?
Okay, so what's next?
I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of After the Gold. And this week we're going to be talking about Robert Zemeckis' 1997 film, Contact, a movie with a fascinating post-Oscar career and how it mirrors and was the first kind of comedy director to move into drama. And I also think a really influential movie to many of the kind of 2010 space movies, which I'm excited to talk about. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is talk about Best Picture follow-ups, movies that were made right after a director won Best Picture. The first part of the video, we talked about the production history. Was there an increase in budget because of the Best Picture win? What did they kind of decide to use their creative capital of winning Best Picture on? That kind of a blank check that's rewarded to so many filmmakers after winning Best Picture. And then we talk about how it was received. Did it also win Best Picture? Did it get nominated for Oscars? What happened to it? What is this kind of modern day legacy? How was it perceived at the time? Because sometimes the movie that came after winning Best Picture is actually more telling of a filmmaker's career and is more well enjoyed than the movie that won Best Picture. So I'm excited to talk about that today. And then the second half of the video, though, I'd also like to give my thoughts on the movie, why I think it's interesting, why I want to cover it, because there is no commonality between all of these movies in the series. We'll jump around from the 2010s to the 90s to the 40s to what have you. Ultimately, that one commonality is I think there's something interesting either to the production history of the movie or the movie content itself. And was really excited to talk about Contact because last week we talked about Martin Scorsese and one of those movie opportunities where, hey, if Martin Scorsese has a movie, let's talk about it. I feel kind of similarly with Robert Zemeckis. I think he's an incredible filmmaker in this period of time. Is really some masterpiece type of movies. So really excited to talk about Contact for the second time on this channel. That's a bit of a tease. I have talked about the movie in the past, so we'll get to that a little bit later on. But as always, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to comment below and let me know. A user a few weeks ago mentioned wanting to talk about Robert Zemeckis, which is why I'm covering this episode on the channel. So, I can't guarantee anything, but feel free to comment below. If there's maybe a director's follow-up movie that I haven't covered, maybe I consider covering it on the show based on some of your comments. I'd love to hear some of that, fan feedback. But without further ado, let's jump into things. Starting off with the production history. The kind of reason why I wanted to cover Contact was part of that kind of user suggestion, and also because I enjoy the movie, and I was thinking about not covering it because I've actually covered it on this channel before. I had a kind of short-lived podcast series called Connor the Contrarian, whereby I would talk about and reclaim movies that were critically reviled at the time or had kind of poor Rotten Tomato scores, and talk about why I think they're actually worth engaging with. So that episode's still on the channel. You can listen to that, but this is the kind of modern 2025 revision of it in a different kind of a format, hopefully a little bit better, a little bit more articulate. That was 5+ years ago at this point now, so should be a little bit different. I was near the start of this channel, but I think the production history of this movie is fascinating because the only way this movie got made was because of the unique position of Robert Zemeckis after winning Forrest Gump. So before we go forwards, let's go backwards. Let's talk about 1994's Forrest Gump, a movie that is maybe a little bit more controversial today than it was at the time, just because amongst film fans, it beat out Shawshank Redemption and Pulp Fiction, these kind of super well-admired movies. But at the time, and even still today, I think it's a very well-regarded movie. It was a huge hit at the time, second highest grossing movie of the year, right behind The Lion King, wins Best Picture, wins Tom Hanks' second Oscar in 2 years. It was this phenomenon that no one saw coming. In a way, kind of like Oppenheimer a couple of years ago, where, if you told me Oppenheimer in 2022, there's going to be a Christopher Nolan movie, it's 3 hours, part of it's in black and white, how much money is it going to make? It's a Nolan movie, so it'll make $300-400 million, I guess, maybe on a good day. It ends up making almost $1 billion. Same thing with Forrest Gump, where Zemeckis was a blockbuster filmmaker. He defined the 80s really with Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and he was consistently making big hits. A protege of Spielberg, or started working at 1941, was kind of part of how he got his start. And now, the movie wasn't necessarily a huge surprise that it won or that it made a bunch of money because he was a box office filmmaker. But the fact that it won Best Picture, that he kind of graduated now from going into comedy movies. I mean, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Death Becomes Her, these are very strict comedy movies. So now the kind of dramedy or the comedy movie with the politically important kind of a message. And then you see how that kind of influences Zemeckis' future and how he thinks he doesn't do straight up comedies anymore necessarily. And likes to tackle more weighty types of issues or topics, what you consider things like Welcome to Marwen, or even though weighty material like Beowulf, and of course Contact and What Lies Beneath. He does kind of have, this is I think a turning point in his career, and a kind of classic Oscars turning point when you see directors like Peter Farrelly, who's doing the Dumb and Dumber movies, and then in 2018 does Green Book and wins Best Picture. Well, his next movie, The Greatest Beer Run Ever, is a comedy of sorts, but also with some real political implications. Same thing with, Adam McKay doing Anchorman and Step Brothers, and then he does The Big Short, and now he's off onto this political satire route. And not necessarily just playing comedies. They all have to have a political message. You could even say someone like Todd Phillips doing Joker after Old School and The Hangover and those kind of big comedy movies now gets some prestige and some Oscar love, does Joker too, and maybe I think is interested more in the comedy, the mix of comedy and also drama and also kind of some politically relevant and topical things. So Zemeckis kind of pioneered that strategy and that kind of a path forward. But regardless, in 1994, he has the second highest, biggest movie of all time. He wins Best Picture. He can do whatever he wants. And what does he decide to do? He decides to make this long dormant, challenging adult space movie called Contact. And this was a movie written by Carl Sagan, legendary astronomer and kind of a media personality in a way, and just an educator, I think. And he had initially thought of this idea as a movie, pitched it around, couldn't get it made. Eventually it made it into a book. That was a big hit. But even still, it was hard to make the movie. George Miller was in it, was trying to make it for a little bit, but they could never essentially get over that hump of this has to be a big budgeted movie. It's about big, serious ideas, but it's not Star Wars. It can't play to kids necessarily. It has to be kind of a more of a big budget, serious adult sci-fi movie. And will that resonate? Well, if a director like Robert Zemeckis is behind it, he can kind of have his say. And if he can make something like Forrest Gump, which maybe on its surface isn't a billion-dollar movie, but was ultimately a huge, huge hit, if he can make that work, well, then maybe he can also make Contact work. So he sets it up. He gets two-time Academy Award winner Jodie Foster, Matthew McConaughey coming off of A Time to Kill, every great actor doing small bit parts like Rob Lowe, who was barely in the movie. He was a big serious actor, and he's on a TV screen for most of the movie. And his budget doubles, $50 million to $90 million. A lot of that, some of that has to do with CGI and some of the effects that's going on, which is still a burgeoning kind of a time there in the 90s. And they try to make this into a kind of summer blockbuster. They say, you know what, let's do it. Let's spend the $100 million. It's a big, weighty sci-fi movie, but let's not put this in October, November, December and make it just a prestige movie. Let's try to make it a summer blockbuster in the same way we made Forrest Gump a summer blockbuster. They release it in the summer and it does fine. It's not a huge hit like Forrest Gump, but it doesn't lose the money in an all-time catastrophe. It kind of came out with a muted box office, muted response critically, wasn't as well regarded as Forrest Gump. And then it doesn't get nominated for any Oscars except for Best Sound. I think that's the kind of biggest disappointment because, okay, let's say it makes the 170 that it did off a $90 million budget. No one's going home super rich, but no one's going home angry. It does what it's supposed to do, but then it goes on and gets nominated for Best Picture and Best Director and is seen as a prestige movie. That's a huge success, I think, for them. But it doesn't do that. It's a middling hit, and it doesn't have the legs of Forrest Gump, and it doesn't win Best Picture or even get nominated for any Oscars. And yeah, I think its modern day reputation is a little bit more celebrated. It's not necessarily that it's more popular necessarily, but I do think that this movie inspires a lot of the kind of weighty, big sci-fi movies of the 2010s and space movies of the 2010s, which I appreciate and love so much and really helped define me as a moviegoer. Like, I always talk about the 2010s, you have this kind of run of $150, $200 million kind of big budget space or sci-fi movies that are geared mostly to adults, and they were working for a while, which is why I think they kept on kind of doing them. But 2013 you have Gravity, 2014 you have Interstellar, 2015 you have The Martian, 2016 you have Probably Passengers, because that has the biggest budget, although that doesn't work. You could also kind of say Arrival too, less of a budget, but still kind of in that like weighty science fiction realm. I think Arrival is in part inspired by Contact in the same way Interstellar, I think, is kind of inspired by Contact. That's 2016. 2017, you have Blade Runner 2049. 2018, you have First Man. So 2019, you have Ad Astra, and it kind of falls off after those kind of last three don't do so well. And it really is defining for every year, at least one or two of these types of movies get made. And I think you can see the lineage of a swing that was scary and difficult at the time to Contact to some of the kind of space movies that they spent money on in the 2010s. And I think there's a modern day kind of beneficiary of the legacy of Contact because it was the first movie to kind of do that. So that's why I thought was notable. But actually transitioning now, we've been going on a little bit long, transitioning to my thoughts on the movie. I think it's a really interesting movie to talk about as well. And I compare this movie to some of those kind of 2010 space movies, more so I would think like Interstellar or Arrival, more so Interstellar, where the plot mechanics of the movie, I think, are the weakest part of the movie, but I don't care. I think this is a movie that wears its emotions on its sleeve. I think it takes big swings emotionally. And if you connect with those, you don't necessarily need to worry about some of the conveniences in the plot of how things get done. I think it asks a lot of interesting questions about how does your spirituality affect you after you've maybe seen an event, or maybe now you've contacted with some sort of outside life force. Does that not kind of either shake your core to the belief or make it even stronger, or make someone who is a non-believer into a believer? Can those two things interject? I thought Foster was really incredible at this movie, taking kind of the unsureness of her character and the kind of bluntness that she has and turning that into kind of a blind confidence that she has. She's a really well-written character, I think, too, in the sense that she's driven and focused, but she also can have a romantic life and sometimes is also interested in getting a good dress to, woo Matthew McConaughey's character, but is also not going to just fawn over him as well and wants to have kind of serious adult conversations. You can see that kind of a struggle of trying to be romantically involved with this man, but then also not maybe aligning on his beliefs and that maybe scaring her, but also seeing her dad within him and the complexities of that story. But what was also interesting this time around, now understanding more of Zemeckis' career and understanding a little bit more, but just about filmmaking and how they make movies, frankly, the camera work of this movie is just so much fun. And I think it's a classic example of, this is a Robert Zemeckis movie. If another director made this, if it would be George Miller or someone else, I think it would look incredibly different. Because Zemeckis ultimately is a kind of populist filmmaker that wants to make things entertaining. And that's why I like this movie, is because it can tackle these kind of interesting, heady themes of faith in God and what we would do if we were contacted by aliens and the societal comments that he makes, with also the kind of, he wants to make the movie entertaining. He just doesn't want to make this just a lecture, a boring lecture. So what he does is he uses every scene, for the most part, and kind of puts it into a showcase of his skills. The one scene I'm thinking of in particular, where it really works, is the moment where they're contacted and Ellie, Jodie Foster's character, hears the sound for the first time, that unique sound that she's been waiting her entire life to hear. And it's an important moment for these characters. But we know it's an important moment for these characters, not because we can, follow along with the story, of course, but because of how Zemeckis shoots it, directs it, and kind of scores the scene as well, where you have this really booming Silvestri score. It's not her on a cell phone in a car. She's in a car. She's on a talk radio, right? That's a decision to be made instead of a cell phone. She's also in a convertible, driving really fast, so it adds that sense of urgency and intensity. She's flying back to the base. You see the wind blowing in her hair, right? She's on the walkie-talkie. She's not yet talking into it at a normal volume. She's screaming at it. Again, another kind of directorial decision to add a sense of urgency. What he also does is he uses the crane to kind of go in and out of the convertible. Then when we cut back to the computer room, we have handheld cameras, which we haven't had really throughout the movie. It's the first time we have handheld cameras. So there's a sense of panic as we move the camera more rapidly and have these pans as we slide our chair across the desk. And then when we cut back to Ellie and she's out of the car, we do this super long tracking take where we're moving through her around these alleys, past these kind of desks, adding once again to the sense of momentum and urgency with the directorial achievement and directorial choices that's being made. So the choice to use a car and make her driving in the car, and then also a walkie-talkie, and then also how they use the crane to kind of come in and out, and that she's driving fast, and then that's convertible, and that all these kind of decisions, one after another, you realize the kind of grandiose blockbuster filmmaking, intense fun kind of moving of the camera. And that's just one sequence. There's a classic sequence of the beautiful shot of the kind of a medicine cabinet trick of the mirror, which is so fascinating and fun to see as well. And that's why I think I connected with it in the same way I connected with actually last week's episode, Shutter Island, where it's a high-level craftsman making the most entertaining version of a movie with, I think, some very interesting, engaging questions. I think it's not a perfect script by any means, or it's a perfect movie. It has its flaws, but it's so kind of earnest and sentimental and doesn't have any kind of the modern winking and undercutting of emotion that some modern day blockbusters do. It's sentimental. It wears its heart on its sleeve. It's emotional. It's not kind to discredit this type of work. This really means something to people, really think it's important. And I think because of the kind of high level of craftsman filmmaking and some of the great performances by the cast, you really believe. And if you don't believe that's okay, and you don't buy into the performances, that's okay too. But if you really do connect with the story and the emotions and the kind of emotional arc of the movie, it really is just an entertaining movie that can also ask some really fascinating and topical and, philosophical type of questions that can make you think, and I think it is great at doing. So it's an influential movie, I think, in many ways, and a movie that only could have been made after the kind of success of Forrest Gump. And I think it's definitely a movie that is deserving to be made after The Gold. But that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, comment below, let me know if you've seen this movie or if you have any kind of future recommendations. Still got a couple of months left before we get back into old Oscar countdown, so lots of kind of time to do that. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.